This is no tabloid whisper, but the raw, word-for-word testimony that sent a shockwave through a hushed federal courtroom when Justin Bieber, once pop's angelic poster boy, finally broke his silence about life under Shawn Diddy Combs. Moments after Usher's revelations faded, Bieber glided to the witness stand in a sleek black suit, hair slightly tousled, and turned years of rumour into a chilling ledger of grooming, coercion, and stolen youth. Reporters froze mid-note. Jurors leaned forward. Diddy stared ahead, carved from stone. "I can't stay silent anymore, because I know what silence costs," Bieber began, detonating the illusion of protective mentorship and exposing a flavour camp where confiscated phones, midnight knocks, and invisible power plays replaced creative guidance. Each measured sentence cracked the industry's glossy façade, revealing influence that felt more like ownership. And when he raised a weather-beaten notebook of unreleased, real lyrics, declaring, "You once said I'd be nothing without you, but you don't own my voice," the room's silence thundered louder than any verdict. The judge's gavel barely settled before tension seeped into every corner of the room. Reporters drummed pens on notepads, jurors straightened behind their nameplates, and Shawn Diddy Combs sat rigid, eyes fixed on a middle distance only he could see. Fluorescent lights buzzed like nervous cicadas overhead, yet the entire gallery seemed to breathe in slow motion, waiting for the next tremor. It came when the clerk announced, "Call your next witness." From the double doors at the rear, a solitary figure appeared, Justin Bieber, unaccompanied, tailored black suit catching the glow like polished obsidian. The hush cracked into a ripple of gasps, camera shutters fluttered, then died as if afraid to break the spell. Each step Bieber took down the aisle felt choreographed by fate, the thump of his dress shoes echoing like a metronome counting down to revelation. Even the bailiff's posture stiffened as the pop star mounted the stand, placing one steady hand on the Bible, the other at his side. In that heartbeat, before a single question was asked, the atmosphere flipped. Anticipation became apprehension. Spectators morphed into witnesses. Whatever veneer of entertainment this trial once wore had just been stripped away, replaced by the raw gravity of a story about to rewrite itself in real time. No one in that gallery, seasoned court reporters included, had truly believed the rumour that Bieber might testify, so when he paused at the rail and faced the packed rows, an electric jolt passed through the room. His eyes scanned the spectators with a composure that belied the swirl of flashbacks racing behind them, cryptic Instagram captions, abrupt disappearances, frantic tabloid headlines from 2014. One reporter whispered, "He actually showed," before catching herself and clamping her notebook shut. Bieber adjusted the microphone, the soft scrape amplified in the stillness, and offered a tight half smile that looked more like resolve than politeness. For years he had existed as a living cliffhanger, fans guessing, bloggers theorising, record labels spinning. But now the mystery had materialised in flesh and heartbeat, ready to speak under oath. His first words, "I never thought I'd be here," landed with the weight of a confession and the snap of a starter pistol because everyone understood the subtext. If the golden boy could break rank, the story was far darker than even the wildest forum threads had dared to suggest. In that instant, court decorum met pop culture earthquake, and the trial morphed from a celebrity spectacle into a reckoning no one could scroll past. For years, Bieber's silence had been the internet's favourite Rorschach test. Fans saw burnout, critics saw diva antics, conspiracy threads saw everything in between, but in the witness box those swirling rumours snapped into brutal focus. He retraced his meteoric rise in a few crisp sentences: YouTube uploads at 13, Scooter Braun's discovery, stadium tours before he could legally drive, then halted as if replaying the exact frame where mentorship twisted. "There was a moment," he said, voice even, "when the people around me changed." One beat later he dropped the name that detonated every timeline, Diddy. The gallery's collective inhale felt tidal. Bieber described how the mogul's promise of legendary guidance quickly warped into invitations that made no creative sense. Parties I didn't belong at, trips where I wasn't sure why I was there, until the memory hardened into a single, shattering admission. I was being groomed. The words fell like lead across mahogany benches. Even defense counsel flinched. In that flash, half-decade threads about sudden mental health breaks, vanishing social posts, and whispered NDAs stopped being fan fiction and fused into testimony under penalty of perjury. Rumour had met reality, and reality was darker than the gossip ever dared. The mentor façade cracked further when Bieber traced how Diddy's Big Brother guidance blurred into boundary erosion, invitations to rooftop after-parties he was too young to enter, late-night phone calls urging him to loosen up and stop thinking like a kid, instructions that lasting in the industry required growing up at ruthless speed. At 15 he mistook it for tough love. Now he called it conditioning. Each directive chipped away at autonomy. Change the haircut, ditch the innocence, pose edgier, until Bieber realised his schedule, social circle, even wardrobe were effectively ghost-written by someone who wasn't on the payroll but controlled every room he entered. Asked why he kept quiet, he inhaled, gaze steady on the jury. Because I thought smiling through it would make it disappear, and because I didn't think anyone would believe me. The confession hung like storm clouds. When the judge announced a brief recess, no one moved, as though standing might shatter the fragile air. Reporters sprinted only after Bieber stepped down, clutching headlines that wrote themselves. The prodigy groomed in plain sight, the cost of compliance seeping into his music, his marriage, his faith. Silence, he'd learned, doesn't heal. It metastasizes, and the court was now witnessing its long-suppressed eruption. Flavor Camp, Bieber said, letting the nickname hang like a bad aftertaste before he peeled back the veneer of mentorship. A so-called creative retreat at one of Diddy's estates that promised inspiration, but delivered something closer to a gilded detention centre. There were no studios, no songwriting circles, just rooms pulsing with DJ booths, champagne towers, and adult eyes that tracked every teenage move. Phones were collected at the door, suites were assigned like dorm cells, and security parked outside each threshold for safety, though every instinct screamed the opposite. Bieber recalled a sleepless 2 a.m. when soft footsteps paused outside his room, followed by a polite knock and an unfamiliar man holding a bottle, smiling as if they shared a secret. He closed the door and spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, counting heartbeats. Morning brought Diddy's critique. "You're too tense. This is the life you're stepping into. If you can't handle it, there's always Canada." A line Bieber now realised was less advice than a dare to surrender his boundaries. The jury absorbed each detail in stunned silence, the phrase "flavor camp" morphing from quirky industry law into Exhibit A of how innocence is repackaged, seasoned, and served to power. The fallout from Flavor Camp didn't arrive with fireworks, it seeped in quietly, through boardrooms and late-night texts that carried more weight than any signed contract. Bieber told the jury that Diddy began materializing like a spectre at crucial moments, unannounced in video sets, backstage corridors, even hotel lobbies on distant tour stops, always armed with a new decree: scrap that melody, toughen the image, lose the puppy love tweets. Edicts everyone obeyed, though his name appeared on no official stationery. Studio sessions became minefields. A producer would glance at his phone, pale, then pivot the entire vibe because Puff's got a better idea. The pop star's calendar repopulated itself with parties he'd never approved, while trusted friends quietly vanished, replaced by drivers, stylists, and security whose true employer felt ambiguous at best. "It looked like mentorship, but felt like ownership," Bieber said, explaining how each directive chipped away at the instinct to say no, until his own preferences sounded foreign in his mouth. The jury listened as he described scrolling through midnight messages, sometimes just an emoji, other times a full paragraph, knowing one unanswered bubble could torpedo a release or leak a rumour. Control, he realised, didn't require contracts or threats. It thrived on omnipresence and the unspoken promise that every avenue forward was gated by a single, silent nod. The tipping point surfaced in the fluorescent heat of Miami, 2011, a supposedly chill weekend on Star Island that felt, Bieber said, less like a getaway and more like a velvet-lined trap. The moment his car rolled up, a man in designer shades politely confiscated his phone, citing house policy, and that tiny surrender foreshadowed the night ahead. Inside, the mansion was eerily muted. Low lights, thumping bass turned down to a heartbeat, clusters of suited strangers with watches worth more than cars. They weren't producers, they weren't fans, they were observers, gauging a 17-year-old's price tag. Diddy played genial host on a balcony overlooking black water, introducing Bieber to men who spoke in abstractions, global fashion, generational legacy, yet never named a single label or company. One clinked champagne and murmured, "You're too valuable to be ordinary," a line that sounded like prophecy until it curdled into possession. When Bieber asked to leave, Diddy's smile froze. This is the hotel tonight. He spent that sleepless evening perched on the edge of a plush bed, watching moonlight crawl across imported marble, feeling not frightened so much as immobilized, owned. By sunrise, he understood the unspoken contract. Keep shining, keep quiet, keep belonging to anyone but yourself. From that weekend forward, every party invite read like a summons, and every quiet moment reminded him how quickly freedom could be traded for luxury, and how little luxury meant once the trade was done. Back in Atlanta a year later, the tension Bieber carried from Miami finally met a quiet counterpoint. Usher, the megastar who had once pulled him from obscurity, cornered him backstage beneath the dim glow of a quick-change tent. Sweat still sparkled on Bieber's brow from the encore when Usher leaned in, no entourage, no cameras, and whispered, "Watch who calls you family. Not every hug is a shield." The warning slithered under Bieber's skin, strange and dissonant against the roar of fans outside, and for a fleeting second he wondered if his mentor was jealous. But jealousy doesn't ghost a friend. Within months, Usher stopped appearing at award shows they were both nominated for, pulled out of a joint single, and answered calls with silence that felt deliberate. Only later, after Diddy's shadow lengthened over every studio and a protective circle of old friends thinned to vapor, did Bieber decode the message. Usher hadn't abandoned him. He'd extracted himself from the same web. Their next true meeting wouldn't come until a hushed LA session in 2016, guitars unplugged, where Usher's first question wasn't about charts or radio spins, but a single loaded query. "Did anything happen you couldn't name until now?" Bieber changed the subject, but the look in Usher's eyes said he already knew. By 2014, the façade finally fissured, and what the tabloids dubbed Bieber's meltdown was, in reality, a last-ditch revolt against an invisible chokehold. He'd begun sketching plans for a raw interview series, notes scattered across hotel stationery, voice memos recorded in whisper, when whispers of that project somehow leaked to the very circle he feared. Almost overnight, paparazzi materialized at off-grid diners, blogs blasted erratic behavior headlines, and half-finished demos, songs meant as confession, not consumption, slipped onto the internet with captions painting him unstable. Then came the email, a grainy video clip he barely remembered. 15-year-old Justin at a Diddy party, clearly intoxicated, someone mouthing something inaudible in his ear before the screen cut to black. No sender, no subject line, just a timestamp and the implied threat. Speak and we release everything. Calls from label execs echoed the same chill. Shelve the docuseries, refocus on the tour, protect the brand. So he shaved his head, cancelled appearances, and retreated into a quiet fury, telling the world he needed space while privately shredding every outline, every unsent exposé. The public saw tantrums and egg-throwing headlines. The industry saw a prodigy being brought to heel. Bieber, staring at himself in hotel mirrors he didn't feel he owned, saw only proof that captivity could masquerade as crisis, and that silence could be weaponized louder than any scream. By the time the public re-embraced Justin Bieber with the glossy purpose comeback, the singer had already made a private pact. Every hit single he handed the machine would finance an exit strategy the machine could not predict. Therapy sessions blurred with Bible study, late-night studio marathons doubled as clandestine memory audits, and a battered moleskin, stuffed with verses too raw for radio, became the vault where he filed evidence of who he'd been before the grooming. Marriage offered cover, faith offered oxygen, but neither dulled the quiet rage that grew each time an old handler tried to reinsert a note or a favour. When Diddy's camp floated a reunion photo op in 2019, Bieber's polite decline felt like cutting a final puppet string. The backlash of whispered threats only confirmed that liberation wasn't imagined, it was intolerable. So he kept receipts, screenshots, time-stamped texts, a paper trail long enough to stretch from the Hollywood Hills to Capitol Hill. And when federal investigators finally asked if he'd testify, the answer arrived as a calm yes, because the notebook was finished, the voice was steady, and the boy who once feared being ordinary had learned something sharper. The only thing more dangerous than speaking truth to power is letting power think it owns the truth forever. When Bieber finally re-entered the witness box for redirect, his exhaustion looked less like fatigue and more like stripped-down clarity, the kind that shows once every mask is burned away. He opened the weather-beaten notebook, thumbed past pages of cramped lyrics, and read a single line aloud. "If my voice cracks, let the truth echo louder." Then he shut it with a soft clap that somehow rang through the room. Turning toward the gallery, he spoke not to the press or the jury, but to an invisible audience of young artists glued to live streams and doom-scrolling feeds. "You're not crazy, you're cornered. But corners can become launch pads if you push hard enough." Reporters froze, realizing they'd just been gifted tomorrow's headline. Only then did Bieber pivot to the defense table where Shawn Diddy Combs sat motionless. "You told me I'd be nothing without you," he said, voice steady as a tuning fork. "Maybe you were right, because with you I was a ghost. Without you, I'm alive." He handed the notebook to the bailiff, entered into evidence like a time bomb, and stepped down. The silence that followed was so complete, even the fluorescent lights seemed to dim, as if the room itself acknowledged that some verdicts arrive long before a jury ever speaks.